I think that I would start my story by talking about that it's been the biggest treasure hunt that I could ever imagine. And what I mean by that was I've been in the nonprofit world for over 20 years, which is so hard to believe. But the nonprofit that I'm in now and how it all started was with my precious mom and learning about treasure hunting. And what I mean by that is my mom was my best friend, and I always had a fear of losing her. And I had struggled with my own health issues, but it was on a day when a doctor came out and I was sitting at the foot of my mom's bed, and he looked at me and he said, "Your mom has ovarian cancer. She's filled with it. It's everywhere. And the prognosis is horrible, months." And I just remember my world fell apart at that moment. And I didn't think it could get any worse. But then I got a call from a doctor that they had been running some tests on me, and they found that I had my mom's gene. And with the gene came some autoimmune diseases that would take away mobility. And the exact words of the doctor were, "Lisa, you need to throw away your running shoes and call it a day. You may not be walking in 6 months." And I sat there and I seriously thought, am I being punked? And my world just fell apart. And I remember, I've got to tell my mom. How am I going to tell my mom? And so I sat at her bed, and I remember saying, Mom, it was just us. It was quiet. And I told her about her prognosis and what had happened, and I told her about what had happened with me. And she closed her eyes, and she was such a woman of faith. And there was a 30-second pause. After she opened her eyes, after that 30-second pause, she looked at me and she sang her favorite hymn. And then she said, "Well, Lisa, this is just a hoot." And I said, "Mom," and she said, "Lisa, we're going treasure hunting. This is the best day of our life. We are going to serve, step out, see miracles." And that's when she started making these little momisms, like giving equals joy, joy equals hope, hope equals healing. And it was at that moment that she said, "I want to begin a nonprofit. I want to start a nonprofit that will help people going through life-altering illness, special needs, crisis situation, children in need." Because many times people that have autoimmune disease don't look sick, but they suffer and they struggle. And I can relate with that. And so we started the journey, and we would wear party hats to chemo, chicken suits. The doctors were required to wear party hats. It was pretty hilarious. And enter therapy dogs. I love dogs. And at that point, I was training some therapy dogs, and we happened to get a silly little bulldog named Mavis Pearl. But she was originally called Fat Tina. She was so fat, she had to scoot. And I fell in love with her. And she was called to do what she did, and she opened many doors. But she became a therapy dog that we would take with us to make visits at hospitals. When we'd go to chemo, we'd take her. Well, someone asked me, how did these little stuffed dogs come into fruition? Because there were stuffed Mavis Pearl dogs, and now they're stuffed Mabel Joy dogs. Well, I'm going to tell you how that happened. We were asked to go visit a little girl who was actively dying in the hospital. She loved Mavis. She wanted Mavis to be with her when she went to heaven. And I was like, how am I going to do this? This is going to be hard. And she was a ballerina. And so I got my little Mavis Pearl dog, and I dressed it in a tutu. And I dressed Mavis in a tutu. And off we went to Children's Hospital. And I remember the elevator opened, and I didn't even need to ask where the little girl was. Mavis took me right to the room. We walked into the room, and you could tell that the little girl was in her last moments. And I had a prayer quilt. I had my little stuffed dog. And I went over and I gave the parents the quilt and the dog, and they held it. And they wanted one last response from their little girl. And I remember Mavis was wanting to get on the bed. I put Mavis on the bed, and I put her underneath the little girl's arm. And the little girl responded for the last time. And she looked at her mom and dad, and she said, "I love you. I love you." And she grabbed Mavis, and she went to heaven. And the parents came up to me after that happened, and they had the little dog in their hand, and they said, "This is part of your ministry. This is part of your ministry. This means so much to us. And every dog leaves with a prayer and a blessing. There's not one stuffed dog that doesn't have a prayer and a blessing over it. And the little girl was buried with her Mavis Pearl dog in her prayer quilt. And ever since that day, we've incorporated the therapy dogs, and there's a little stuffed pup in everything that goes out as like a calling card that we're there. So we love animals. We love the way that they break the barriers, and they make visits with us. So we started the journey, and it grew, it exploded, and it turned into care boxes, care packages, care bags. And we started it as Joy in the Cause, and it's now Lisa Bain Ministries. And it has just literally been such a joy to see how 5 minutes of joy can change a life.